So I now have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ashleigh Wright. Dr. Ashleigh Wright is the Associate Director for Student Engagement of the Institute for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access, IDEA Institute, at the Grainger College of Engineering and Assistant Teaching Professor in the Department of Material Science and Engineering at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She has over 8 years of experience understanding the factors and implementing strategies that promote success in STEM undergraduate and graduate students, particularly those from underrepresented populations. She has led and managed several training and pathway programs and facilitated workshops that support academic, personal, and professional development of students in STEM degree programs at North Carolina State University and Louisiana State University. She has earned degrees in chemistry from Wofford College, Bachelor of Science, North Carolina A&T State University, Master's, and Louisiana State University, PhD, where her research focused on the development and characterization of gold-coated organic nanoparticles, nanoGUMBOS. Did I say that correctly? Yes. Group of uniform materials based on organic salts is what that stands for. And biocompatible designer ionic liquid gels for drug delivery applications. With that, please join me in welcoming Ashleigh.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm like, okay, we got a little bit hanging there, a little bit longer. So thank you for the invitation and thank you for the introduction. So my talk for today is entitled Beyond the Bench, Translating Your Technical Skills to Pursue Your Passion. And throughout the conversation today, you'll understand what that title means. Because I kind of took that path with my academic training to now my professional career. So I'm going to start by giving you a little behind the scenes introduction of who I am and my introduction and my background. So this right here is a photo of my mother. This was in 1973, and this was an article that I just found last spring. And it's a picture that out of a newspaper from Indiana State University. So my mother is a chemist. So she earned her Bachelor's of Science from Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1975. So I guess this is my role model. I did not kind of put two and two together until someone was like, oh, you're just like your mom. This was like years later. I'm like, oh, wait, she is a chemist. Okay. But so basically from my background, I grew up in the lab. So after finishing her bachelor's in 1975, she had a couple years of experience at the Medical University of South Carolina, but her long-term career was as a chemist at Georgia Pacific Chemical Company, where she retired after 30 years as a quality supervisor. So pretty much all of my life, she was working for Georgia Pacific. So I was the kid at the science fair in elementary, middle school with like actual beakers and flasks, which worked out really nicely for, I won a lot of science fair prizes. So here's another photo of me. I was in a pageant. I don't even know what year this was, but I was 11 years old. And you know, you have to write your bio of like who you are, what are your activities, what are your favorite things to do, kind of thing like that. I'm still over here if that's okay. But you'll see at the bottom that I put I wanted to be a chemist. And I don't recall like thinking about like, this is like, oh my ultimate dream is to be a chemist or a chemist like my mom. But when I found this like a course years later, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's funny how things come full circle. But I just thought this was a really good connection to tie, you know, my background and my exposure to chemistry as a child and how that really manifests itself ultimately years later, and really where I really surpassed where my mother accomplished, where she got her bachelor's and I went on to my PhD. Though that was never a plan, that's really what ultimately happened. So with that being said, my academic journey took me along that path. I earned 3 degrees in chemistry, bachelor's from Wofford College, which is a small liberal arts university in South Carolina, Spartanburg, South Carolina. So my home is in South Carolina. I then went on to pursue my master's at North Carolina A&T State University, which is the HBCU, Historically Black College University in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then I left there, went straight to my PhD at Louisiana State University. So from there, so I have a lot of technical training. My master's focused on a lot of spectroscopy. I did fluorescence spectroscopy. And then in my PhD, this is a kind of bioanalytical materials research that I focused on there for my PhD. So now you fast forward to some of the things that were read in my bio, and my professional interests and goals have been in STEM education research. So understanding the barriers and implementing strategies that ultimately promote the success of students, particularly from underrepresented groups in STEM. My particular interests are holistic student development. So not just concerned about their research training, but also who students are, their professional development, mentoring, pathway and transition programs, and interinstitutional partnerships. So how do we get from here to there? So I'm going to highlight a few kind of poignant experiences that I had that kind of guided me along the way. So it's not a comprehensive list, but it's just kind of a few key points that I'll highlight. So number one, I started with outreach. When I was a master's student, I participated in the Greensboro Area Math and Science Education Center called GAMSEC, and it was an externally funded program where my responsibility was teaching 7th grade science. We also helped students with science fair projects. So this was kind of like my first formal introduction into kind of doing outreach. And to see the students really get excited about science, excited about experiments, things that they can really do at home was like really fascinating, because for me, I already had that like on a day-to-day basis, you know? So like when my mother get called into work to go into the lab because something happened and we're down in Charleston shopping, she would drag us all back home, you know, and I would just kind of sit in the lab with her, wait for her to finish, and she'd be like put on titrations and stuff to kind of keep me occupied. But you know, that wasn't an everyday experience for a lot of kids, especially children that looked like myself. So I was just like, oh my gosh, you know, and again, you know, I had science fair projects where I had class doing the acid-base, you know, experiments with the red cabbage, you know, pulling out the baking soda and all that kind of stuff for a science fair. But, you know, to see that the students, you know, this is a really old picture, but I was able to find it out of something I wrote during my master's time. But this is one examples of some outreach that I had gotten into, and I was just like, you know, it really fulfilled me to see other students really get excited about something that was just so like everyday and natural for me growing up. Then I was a teaching assistant as well when I was a master's student, and there was a conversation with one of my students where after class, she just kind of came up and was talking to me about like, what was I doing? And, you know, she was fascinated that I was in a master's program and I was about what, 20, 21 years old, 22 years old. And she was just like, oh my gosh, like, I want to be just like you. And she changed her major from biology to chemistry to be like me. And I'm like, wow, like I had never really thought that of myself as being like a role model or to have that sort of impact on a student when I'm just kind of doing my job as a graduate student because that's how I was getting paid at the time. And so realizing that my position and where I was, which is something that I thought was just so natural and kind of expected really, was really impactful for the students that I was interacting with in this way. The other thing was seeing a role model and having a mentor. So my last year of my master's program, we had a chemistry symposium for the first ever of the department. And Dr. Warner was the guest speaker. And I had a conversation with him that was kind of forced by my advisor at the time because he was encouraging me to go for my PhD, which was something I had never had plans to do. I was kind of tired of school, you know, wasn't really in love with research, but always liked the science. And I really didn't want to go back to get another degree in chemistry. Plus, I thought it would be really non-representative of me to have 3 degrees in chemistry when I knew I didn't really want to be a bench scientist. And so in this conversation, or in this symposium, Dr. Warner gave a research talk, which is very similar to my master's work at the time, because he was a he did a lot of fluorescence work, spectroscopy work in his, at the time in his career. But his second afternoon talk was about STEM education programs that he was doing that focused on diversity across the university at LSU. And at that moment, I was like, that's exactly what I want to do. And so we had a conversation of how he was able to do that as a chemist, but also do the same thing as, you know, another, basically a full-time position on campus. So he had multiple roles on campus. So fast forward, I go to LSU, and one of his expectations, and he ended up being my research advisor, was that we be a mentor. And so I mentored high school student, undergraduate students, largely through summer programs, and being able to help students get the experience and the skills and the knowledge that I was receiving along with me, essentially, because they were helping me with my own PhD project, really was, again, fulfilling, but also I was also being mentored by other graduate students and also my advisor, of course. One other thing is just really understanding scientific training and development. So as I matured through my graduate my graduate program, I was less interested in the particular research that I was doing and more interested in like these other things that were happening that no one really taught you about. Like, how do you really like look for or decide which papers are the best papers to use for my general exam, which is like a qualifying exam similar to that for engineering. What about, you know, navigating relationships with your advisor and your peers? Learning how to write papers, even if it was just an abstract for a conference. Like, there was no formal training or like, this is what you need to do. It was just like, oh yeah, you have to do your journal exam next. Okay, like, how do I do that? You know, but there was never really kind of formal conversations or trainings or development in that way. So I became more interested in that and like, why isn't anybody talking about this like unwritten curriculum that's happening around us? But it's an expectation for you to really do that to be successful here, right? And then lastly, reflecting on my own experiences and lessons along the way. So again, when I was halfway through my master's program, one of the instructors came up to me and she was like, why are you here? And I was like, what do you mean, why am I here? Like, she was like, well, why didn't you just go straight for your PhD? And I was like, because you can't do that. Like, it's a stepwise thing, right? Your bachelor's, master's. She was like, no, you could have just gone. Like, oh, really? But nobody told me that. So I'm like, well, I'm halfway through, so I'll, you know, stick it out. But then again, as I am now as a graduate student, speaking with other undergraduates, a lot of them didn't know that either. They didn't also, they know that you got paid for school. So when I got paid, I don't remember what it was, but it was not what I got paid for a PhD. I thought I was like making a whole lot of money as a master's student. Then I go to like grad school and I end up getting a fellowship for like $30,000. I'm like, whoa. Like, but no one said like that's normal. Like, well, 30,000 isn't normal, but it was a but to get paid to go to school was not something that was ever told to me. So all of these things, along with some other pieces here and there, but these are kind of the highlights that I'm just like, okay, I feel like I can have more of an impact with helping students navigate this space of STEM education, whether it's at the undergraduate or graduate level, outreach, exciting the younger ones about so many opportunities that exist from a discipline that I pretty much was born into and absolutely loved. Okay, so now I have all of this training, right? And I have this like these desires and interests, but now how do I connect my professional back to my academics? Okay. One of my biggest hesitations when I was kind of getting out into the workforce, in my first career position was at LSU. So I was able to work under Dr. Warner, not as his research student, but under his Office of Strategic Initiatives. And so that was kind of a less by association situation to where I was able to transition over to the other side of campus and really learn the ins and outs of what he was doing over there. And had been really successful at it for years. But as I started to navigate where I was going to go next, it was like, how do I connect all of these years of training when people see that I have a bachelor's, master's, and I was already getting these questions, like what made you go over to OSI when you have 3 degrees in chemistry? So I had to really think about what did I learn and how can I market myself for this interest that I have with the training that I have already, you know, received over the last, I don't know, over 10, 12 years. So I then started to look at how the skills that I gained technically translated into professional skills. So this is just a small table that's not, again, not comprehensive, but just to give you an example, of what you're learning as a graduate student and how that translates to other skills that can help you be successful in any career that you choose. So conducting research, very broad. So I'm kind of breaking it down into small pieces. Conducting research is not just about actively doing something in the lab or in the field. It's about how do you define research questions? What are the research techniques that are you using? How do you design experiments strategically? Not that you're like, oh, I think I'll do this and try this out. But no, using the literature to really be strategic about the questions that you're trying to answer, analyzing the data, managing the data. Like all of those are really professional skills, technical skills, professional skills of project management, critical thinking, problem solving, prioritizing, and troubleshooting. And again, this is not comprehensive. Some of the skills here can be interchanged, but I'm just trying to just show you some equivalents here. All right, when it comes to reading and analyzing literature, every time you have a question, what's the response? Go to the literature, read the literature. What does that mean? Okay, you're learning about reading comprehension and decision making. Again, like, how do I know if this is a good paper for me? Like, what value do I get out of this paper that can inform me to make a educated decision about the next steps for my research? Presenting and writing, communication. The reason that I'm able here to stand here in front of you and talk is because I've presented so many times, whether it's in my group meetings, whether it's for my analytical seminar, whether it's for my general exam or my defense, or even professionally. And, you know, again, on topics that I didn't grow up, I wasn't trained in. So these conversations that I'm having now are not the conversations I was having in graduate school. It was about my research. But I'm able to communicate. One thing I tell graduate students now about teaching, you know, oftentimes they shun from the teaching workshops and professional development workshops that the grad school may offer because I don't want to be a faculty, I don't want to teach. Teaching is not just about being a professor in front of students. This right here is a teaching opportunity. You learn how to stand in front of a classroom, learn how to communicate difficult ideas, or you learn how to, you know, have a conversation about ideas in front of people. So you can gain that skill from a teaching workshop. How to put together effective presentations is part of teaching, which is a skill in communication. So don't shun away from those just because you don't want to be a faculty member. Mentoring. So it's not really a technical skill, but it's really something that you should be doing as a graduate student. So that's why I have the asterisk there, so some of the graduate school activities. So mentoring results into leadership, empathy, understanding what people are going through, having interpersonal skills. How do you interact and engage with other people? And also management. So again, if you have an undergraduate mentee that's helping you with your research, how do you keep them on task when they're not, you know, they're taking 15 hours of classwork plus helping you for a few hours out of the week, but your full-time responsibility is your research. But how do you kind of manage them to keep them on task? Give them enough tasks or a responsibility to where they can have an impact on your work, but not be overwhelmed with their other responsibilities as an undergraduate student and the activities they're in outside of classroom. And then also, obviously, involvement in professional societies like this program here, coordination, like the people that put all this together. I can understand your pain to put such a program like this together, but it's really great. But that, you know, you have coordination, leadership, time management, networking, you know, really getting your speakers aligned and communicating with everybody to make sure that everything goes on task. So now how do you take those same professional skills into the activities that I do professionally? So if you go back to the project management, I've managed a number of NSF program projects that are multi-million-dollar budgets, designing programs that are specific to undergraduate students or graduate students, first generation students, low income students, minority students. All of those programs have to be really specified to that particular population. There is no one size fits all program. Selecting seminar workshop topics or designing intervention strategies, reading comprehension. The same way that I review literature for my research, I have to review literature in this field. This is a peer-reviewed research topic in a career choice. Communicating, facilitating workshops, presenting in front of multiple people, publishing in journals, leadership, mentoring students, also working with faculties, administrators within the university and other universities, coordination, leadership, time management, organizing programs, conferences, organizing people, balancing the student needs, and also my own workload. So what does this look like? So if you're thinking about having a career outside of your technical training. So technical skills should relate to your transferable, to other transferable skills like I just showed in core competencies. So the core competencies, particularly when it comes to graduate and postdoctoral training, are discipline-specific concepts. Can't see the other one. Research skills, communication, professionalism, management, leadership, and responsible conduct of research. So take a minute when you have some free time to look up core competencies. A lot of industry, a lot of employers, they will hire you if you have these core competencies, particularly these, like what now you used to call them soft skills. I don't really like that term of soft skills, but they will hire somebody that can lead a team before they can hire somebody that can run a particular instrument. Okay, keep that in mind. So these other skills right here, you really need to be focusing on those, gaining those skills as a graduate student. Then you are, not to say that you don't do your research, that is definitely what you should be doing. But alongside of your research and your technical training, please make sure that you're getting these other skills here. Think about what influenced you and how you can influence others. Okay, so I kind of share some of my story along the way of who has influenced me and why that has driven my desire to be an influencer. Who has inspired you? Okay, and how can you be an inspiration to somebody? Everybody in here has a unique story. Everybody in here has a unique path. That can be very inspirational to somebody that's going through the same thing, that they don't know that you have gone through it, or neither do you know that they're going through it as well. Think about what you're good at and what you enjoy. Okay, and then lastly, how can you fill in those gaps? So some people are really good at writing. There are careers out there for scientific writing, for publishing articles, communicating the science in magazines, in journals, in columns or whatever, in public policy for government officials. Like if writing is your niche, but you have a technical training, there is a career for you. So think about what you're good at, what you enjoy, and how that can be influential. Also, this doesn't have to be a career, it could be a passion project. So here are examples of some people that I personally know who have passion projects that, and also careers in STEM or engineering, that have their own nonprofit organizations where they can still pursue their passion projects. Alicia is one of my graduate school classmates. So her and her high school classmate from Detroit started the lab drawer out in Detroit. Calicia, who I met also at LSU, she was a master's student there in mechanical engineering. She now has Student Career Studio, where she offers information for students on different career opportunities, how to have effective LinkedIn pages, all kinds of professional development topics. And STEAM Forward is an outreach program. Janita has a career at NIST, along with some other people that that was part of the undergrad program at LSU. And then Nehemiah Mabry, he has a STEM media where he uses videography, music to allow as a vehicle to express interest in STEM or engineering ideas. So be sure to kind of look those up. But it doesn't have to be a career, it could also be a passion project. So lastly, your technical training does not have to exclude you from non-technical careers. Actually, I think it makes you better. The training that we received as engineers and scientists is, I haven't been in any other discipline, but I can only imagine that the training that we go through is very rigorous to where you are very, very qualified. You can be an engineer or a scientist and something else. So again, it doesn't have to be one thing. There's so many career opportunities options that are out there. So please explore, network, research, and try. This conference is a perfect venue to networking with other people. Utilize your technical skills to market your professional skills, like I showed in the table before. Be intentional with your training, so making sure you're getting communication, networking, management experience, and do what you love. So with that, I'll close.
I have one question. Anybody wants to ask a question?
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Feel free to email me if you do.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Ashleigh, for your great talk. Okay, we will now move on to our second speaker, Asha-Dee Celestine. Dr. Asha-Dee Celestine is an ORISE Fellow in the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy and a visiting assistant professor in the Department of Aerospace Engineering at Auburn University. Prior to joining Auburn, she was an associate research scientist in the Mechanics and Materials Group at Schlumberger-Dahl Research. I'm so sorry if I, thank you so much. Dr. Celestine received her BS in Mechanical Engineering from Howard University, MS in Aeronautics and Astronautics from Stanford University, and her PhD in Aerospace Engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her research interests include multifunctional materials, composite materials, and experimental mechanics, and she has authored several research articles on these topics. Dr. Celestine also holds a patent for the control of thermoplastic composite degradation in downhole applications. With that, please join me in welcoming Asha-Dee. Okay. It's completely my bad.
Yeah, it's a French word from yeah. Okay, so thank you to the grad student committee for here. Thank you all for showing up. And the schedule so far has been very stimulating. I'm kind of glad that I'm at one of the last sessions. So I played a lot, lots of Wright, presented a lot of good technical info. And so my talk is going to be a little bit non-technical. I titled it Zigzag Lessons from a Nonlinear Career Path. And basically what I want to share with you this afternoon is just some lessons I've learned as I've gone along in my career, which is, I'm not mid-career, I guess I'm still in early career, if you look at it in terms of professions, but I've done a lot of things and I've learned a lot of lessons. I thought it might be useful. For some of you who may find yourself in the next 10, 50 years on a nonlinear career path. So let's get started. Okay, so just to give you some background, I know this Zoom tag is going to throw off all my titles, but I'll tell you what this is. It says background. Okay, so I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, which is.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to remove this just so it's.
Oh. There we go. I wish I knew that. Sorry. So it's a twin island republic in the Caribbean. So if you look at a map of North and South America, it doesn't show up on the map. It's probably a couple pixels, and then if you zoom in, you get these two islands. Population is 1.3 million, so we're small. And so I grew up there. Went to primary school, as we call it, secondary school / high school. And during high school, they usually, every couple of years, they ask you, what do you want to be? We went to very prestigious high school. I went to a very prestigious high school. It was very achievement focused. So every couple of years, you needed to assess where you're going in life, because everybody knows where they're going at 18. And so when I was asked at the beginning of high school, I wanted to be a mathematician or pediatrician. Near the end of high school, I wanted to be either a material scientist or an aerospace engineer, and I kind of settled on aerospace engineering. And so the picture that I had in my mind was I would get a scholarship to a university that taught aerospace engineering. I'd get an aerospace engineering job, and I would progress. I would buy a house. I would live out on acres of land. I would have a dog. Things would be fantastic, and I'd have this nice linear trajectory of my career, and I'd retire at the end, and life would be great. But that didn't look right. As you can tell from the image that I'm using here, my path has been a little bit zigzag. Things have not been definitely linear. Oh, because yeah. Okay, let's see. Does that? No. Okay, so this is what my path. Oh, go back.
Oh. Will I go back?
It should. Yes. So this is where I started, where I had the idea of nice linear trajectory in terms of career, and this is what it actually turned out to be. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that I'm in a small country, 1.3 million, it's in the Caribbean. There are no aerospace engineering programs in the Caribbean. Okay, so in order to be an aerospace engineer, you do have to leave the Caribbean and study abroad. The challenge with studying abroad as an international student, as some of you know, is that you need to fund your studies. Okay, and sometimes when you do the conversion rate, it is not amenable to funding your studies. So as the eldest of 5, my plan was that I would not put my parents into debt to fund this grand dream that I had of being an aerospace engineer. So I started applying for scholarships and never got enough scholarship money to be able to leave and study aerospace engineering. So the first thing I did after high school was I got this temporary position as a library technician in my high school library, which was fun. It was nice to stay within the school environment. It didn't pay a lot, so I also supplemented that with being a math tutor. Right? There are a lot of exams that we have to sit at different stages in our high school career, and so there are a lot of parents that are willing to pay people to help their students pass these exams. So I did that for a couple of years. Actually, I did that for maybe just a year, and then they stopped the program, which means that I needed to find something else to do. So I continued tutoring for a little bit, and then I got the opportunity to teach at a private high school. And so basically the way our education system worked back in the Caribbean is it's based on a British system. High school, but then you have the option of doing 2 extra years, the advanced level. And what that translates to is like a first year of college. So by the time you finish with your advanced level of high school, you have done about 1 year of college, and there are certain private schools that will allow you to teach high school students based on those qualifications. So I taught high school math, physics, and general science for 4 years. I had students ranging from 13 to 21 because the high school that I taught at was a school that was also geared towards students who had not made it successfully through the traditional system, and so they would come back and would repeat a year or 2 of high school and write their exams again. So I did that, had a lot of fun there. And while teaching high school, I continued applying for scholarships, I continued applying to different schools in the US, and eventually got a full scholarship to Howard University. Howard doesn't offer aerospace engineering, but I had done some research, and they said that you can start off in mechanical engineering and switch to aerospace. My plan was to go to Howard for a year and then figure out how to switch to aerospace engineering after that. But then when I got to Howard and I spoke with a couple of my professors, they said, you don't need to switch, you just need to do the courses, the aerospace sciences courses, and you get that aerospace engineering background that you want to. So I got my bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Right after that, I got my master's in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford. The plan was to, even though there was a little kink in my trajectory here, the plan was to continue on, make it as linear as possible, and go straight from my MS to my PhD. Had the qualifying exam, the PhD qualifying exam. Some of you have had oral PhD qualifying exams. So just picture you're one of 2 female students in your year. You are the only Black student, and your oral qualifying exam is in front of 3 or 4 eminent white professors in aerospace engineering. That does not recall the trauma. And so I did the oral exam, and I know usually at this point in the story people say, yes, I had imposter syndrome. I wrote the exam and I did really well. I did not. I failed the exam. And then I had this existential crisis because I've never failed an exam before. And so I said, oh my word, what in the world am I going to do? What am I here for? Did I leave home with these grand ideas in vain? So I chose to do something different. Instead of rewriting the exam, I said, I'm going to go out into industry and find a job in aerospace engineering. I mean, I have a master's in aeronautics from Stanford. Surely I can get an aerospace job, right? That didn't work out. No one at that time, and I think they still don't hire international aerospace engineers to work in the US. It has to do with the fact that a lot of aerospace companies deal with defense contracts, so they need to protect their IP. But I was able to get an offer from Schlumberger, which is an oil field services company. And they're multinational, so you can work anywhere, which is fantastic for me, but I wanted to travel. And so what I ended up doing was working as a wireline field engineer in Venezuela. I worked there for 9 months in Venezuela. During that time, they also sent us to train in Abu Dhabi. So I spent 3 months in Abu Dhabi, which was fantastic. And then as I was training, I realized that I still had that itch, that desire to get a PhD, because I really wanted to teach. Teaching is in my blood. And so I went back to school where I got my PhD in aerospace engineering. And so I was like, okay, now I have my PhD. Things should move as planned, right? So basically what you should get from what I'm saying now is that I have a very hard time, or I take very long in synthesizing the fact that my linear career path that I have in my mind is not actually going to work out, right? I should know that by now. We've already but it didn't. So after my PhD, I knew that I couldn't go directly into academia. I needed to get a little bit of experience. So I spent 2 years. The first year I was a research scientist at Schlumberger again, but this time at the research center. And I also worked as a postdoc at Harvard. There's some visa issues that cause that transition, but nobody asks that when you put it on your resume, so it looks fantastic. And about 2 years after that research scientist position, I transitioned to an assistant professor at Auburn University, which I'm still affiliated with now. So I taught at Auburn for 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. We made it through the pandemic with my students, but I had this desire to do something different, okay? And I guess at this point, I've done industry, I've done high school teaching, I've done academia, I've been out in the field, I've spent nights working in the middle of nowhere with men who don't speak any English. And so I thought, you know what, there must be something more meaningful that I could be doing. Teaching is fantastic, I love teaching, but is there something else I can add to my skill set? And so I've taken a break from Auburn and I started this fellowship position at the US Department of Energy. They call it an educational experience. It's not a full-time position. And basically what they do is they bring in PhDs. So whether you are just graduated or you've graduated for a number of years, but they bring you in and they kind of give you that exposure to the way the US Department of Energy works. So I work within the Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office, where we work on promoting hydrogen as an alternative fuel source, clean fuel source. So that's my background. It's taken a lot of twists and turns, and as you can imagine, I've learned a lot in my short life. I put the fellowship position here and not to the end because it's not the end. I have accepted the fact that my career trajectory is not going to be linear. I've had a lot of fun on this trajectory, and so at this point, I don't want it to be linear. But I would not recommend it to anyone. And so please don't take any pictures and think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Okay. So basically what I want to share in the next couple of slides is just some lessons that I've learned over the last over the last couple of years. Lesson number 1, be persistent and forward thinking, but doesn't do that. I learned this lesson, or I was taught this lesson in high school. One of my high school teachers was actually a mentor, and she would just drop these nuggets in me. And one of the things she always told me was, what doesn't grow dies. And so even when I left high school and I didn't get to go directly from high school to my first degree, my mindset was always, this is where I'm going, right? So even though I had the high school teacher position, which is a fantastic position, and stuff you're able to influence and impact lives, my goal was always to get that first degree in engineering. And so I was always thinking, okay, what can I do now that would help me get there? And so thinking forward, growing, learning, doing research, and being persistent. Okay. think it took me maybe 5 years between high school and actually starting my bachelor's degree. And so I had to keep applying. I had to take the rejections. And I think when I did eventually get a scholarship from Howard, it was the month before my SAT scores were going to expire. And I would have to rewrite the SATs, which nobody wants to do. And so the first lesson I would say that's been key to me and that I've learned over the years is the fact that you just need to be consistent. Just keep knocking on doors, keep trying. Of course, if you try something once or twice and it doesn't work, you may want to tweak your approach. But is it Einstein who said if you do the same thing and expect the same response, then that's insanity, right? Okay, lesson number 2, don't be afraid to try something different. I had to do this after my master's, right? My plan, my mindset was aerospace engineering. I'll be an aerospace engineer. And so telling me that I would be a field engineer, an oil field engineer, that was not in any of my plans, but I knew that I needed to do something different, okay? And so that's what I tried. So this is a picture of me, it's kind of dull here. So these are the trucks that we go out in. This is me here in my overalls, which is fantastic preparation for the pandemic days where you don't have to get all dressed up. And then these are all the guys that I worked with. And they were fantastic to work with, but it was a very different environment from what I was accustomed to. Some of the best opportunities are going to arise when you do something different, when you do try something new. Because of just making that one decision, taking that position, I was able to visit a lot of different countries and live in a lot of different countries, make friends from all over the world. Lesson number 3, a detour doesn't mean that your dream is dead, okay? Don't be discouraged if things don't work out the way that you think they would or you think they should, all right? I've always wanted to be an aerospace engineer. And even when I had those detours, I kept thinking about it, kept working towards it, and I was able to achieve it. I'm going to go quickly through these. Okay. Number 4, you're going to make mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes in this nonlinear path, but it's very important that you acknowledge your mistakes, accept your mistakes, forgive yourself, very important, and keep moving. And as you do that, what I've learned to do and what I'd encourage you to do is to rehearse your story, craft your story and rehearse it in the sense that you keep telling yourself over and over, this is what I've done, this is what I want to do, this is where I'm going. And so remind yourself of your strength, remind yourself of your faith, remind yourself of your potential. Nelson Mandela, he says, I never lose. I either win or I win. I think that's a fantastic philosophy to take in life. Everyone's still trying to figure it out, okay? You may be sitting here and thinking about your research advisor or your boss and you think they have it all figured out. Nobody has it all figured out. We're all still trying to figure it out. Whether it's a student who just failed an exam and they need to come back and spend 2 more years repeating high school, whether it's a manager in a Fortune 500 company, everybody's still trying to figure it out. And while we're doing that, it's very important for us to just be kind, to extend grace as much as possible, and to be respectful. Okay? Number 6, you need an anchor. This one's important. I probably should have put it at the beginning, but there must be something that anchors you, because when your trajectory starts going haywire, quote unquote, and zigzag, there must be something that kind of holds you in place. You need to have something as a foundation. For me, that's my faith. And that kind of keeps me grounded. It gives my life meaning. So regardless of what I do, that's the foundation of my life. And so find an anchor. You probably already have your anchor. Hold on to that anchor because that's going to keep you when things start going a little bit crazy. Learn to trust yourself. This one has been a process. I've grown up in a culture where you take a lot of advice from your elders, okay? And advice is good. Good advice is even better. But at the end of the day, you need to know what is best for you. And a lot of times that comes with experience, going through tough times and trials and triumphs, but you need to be able to make those decisions for yourself. And so as you work through it, kind of work on trusting yourself as opposed to always looking to other people to tell you what to do. Okay. Number 8, and this has come up a lot during the talks that we've had today, do not ever compare your journeys. No one is like you. You are unique. And I know it's cliche, but it's true. And I think we always need to remind ourselves of this. Our experiences, our environment, everything about us makes us who we are. But you need to remind yourself that you personally, you're born to contribute in your own unique way. And nobody else can take that away from you. So don't compare the journeys that you're taking. Even if you're running along with someone on the same track or on the same path, you're still on two different journeys, and you need to appreciate that. And lastly, have fun. All right, there's no comparison to having fun in what you do. Sometimes you may not have fun in the official career that you're involved in, so find other things to have fun. I know when I was doing my PhD, spent a lot of time running, biking. I also spent a lot of time playing music as part of our worship team at my church. So I played drums and I'd sing and that kind of stuff. I had a blast because I love music, right? So find the thing that you love and do it. And then always do your best. Always put your best foot forward. Pursue excellence. You don't know where your next job is going to be, what your next responsibility is going to be. And what you've done in the past is going to be the best recommendation for what you can do in the future. And so make sure that whatever you do is always your best. And then at the end, you can do these nice fancy jumps like I do. So thank you. But I am a teacher, so I have an extra lesson for you. Life is simple. All right. I know it feels complicated, but what I've learned is if you sit and think, process things, life really boils down to just a few things and work on getting those few things done well. And then it's going to be like sitting on the beach in the Caribbean. I really enjoy that. All right, so thank you. And I hope I was looking.
A few questions, if anybody has any questions to ask. How did you know it was the right time to move on when you did?
Huh. Oh, what lesson was that? How do you know? I think, and this is just me, right? There's usually, you start getting that information, like things, so, okay, let me take for me, right? Like, usually it'll be, I start thinking about doing something different. And it starts off and it's okay, it's not. But then it starts building an intensity of it. And usually for me, there'll be things that start happening that kind of give me that, that's an indication that, okay, maybe it's time for me to move on to something different. That's one thing. Another thing, sometimes you don't have control of when it's time to move on. A lot of these situations that I've been in, I had no control over it. Like visa issues, I don't have a control over. And so those are the ones where you kind of fall into moving on. But a lot of times the ones where I have made the decisions because there's something going on, like I want to do something different. I want to do something different.
Yeah, I have a question for you. How did you deal with being so far away from home?
Good question. Lots so far. So when I very good question. When I first left Trinidad, we didn't have cell phones. So I would, every weekend, I would go, there's a corner shop that sold other things and phone cards. And so I would buy phone card and I would call home every weekend just to stay in contact. And now we have things, we have cell phones and FaceTime and all that kind of stuff. But I'm still dealing with being home because being away from home because all my family, they're still back in Trinidad, right? And so, especially during the pandemic where I couldn't go home because I try to go home at least once a year. But during the pandemic where you couldn't physically go and people would call me and be like, oh, today's this birthday, you can join via Zoom. And my mom does it like, I know she means well, but she's like, oh, it would be so good if you were here. But it's a I say that usually what happens is in terms of missing home, it's exponential and then it kind of just stays at a certain level and you learn to manage it. And then you keep going. I think those are my ways of dealing. I'm not recommending that.
So, like with all of that, how do you keep pushing yourself forward or keep yourself motivated?
That's a good, like, how do I don't think I do it actively. Like, I think there's something intrinsic or internal within me that's always pushing me, not so much for achievement, but okay, so let me put it this way. So I like to learn new things. I like to do new things, which is probably why my career looks like this. And so I think because I'm always looking for something new to learn and to do, that gives me that kind of motivation to do these different things. Yeah. So that's why I say I don't recommend it, because not everybody will have that motivation. Some, which is perfectly fine, perfectly fine. Some people like to do just one thing and stay with that one. But personally, that's just not.
I have a question for both panelists. If you had to do something, if you had to change something about your journey, what would it be?
You want to go first?
Probably the last question, unfortunately.
I don't think I would change anything, to be quite honest with you. It was nothing that I planned, but I feel like I was always like in the right place at the right time. Opportunities happen when they happen. So for example, my master's, my master's took 3 years. Typically it's a 2-year program. But my first research project was going nowhere, 8-9 months, nowhere. And I'm like, look, we got to do something. So I started a whole new project more than halfway into my program. So it took me actually 3 years. Had it not been for that 3rd year, I would not have been there when we had that chemistry symposium where I met Dr. Warner, who is the only reason I was at LSU. I didn't apply for a PhD. Like, I did not want to go to a PhD program. I was like, I'm done with research. I hate research. I was very adamant and I was very honest even in that conversation. It's like, okay, well, just apply. We'll see how you like it. And I was still actively applying for jobs. Like, I was adamant about I'm not going back, especially in chemistry. I was open to education, but not chemistry. And a job was coming through. Deadlines were approaching where I had to say whether or not I was gonna, accept the offer that I was getting for me. And I was just like, I guess, because going home was not an option. Going back home, 2 degrees in chemistry. My mom is a chemist, and she's gonna put me to work at GP. I'm not going. I'm not going to go. And so, but had it not been for that 3rd year, everything else after that would have been totally different. I know for a fact. So I honestly don't think, and it had it not been for the first career opportunity, but working with him and learning all those things that I did in his office would not have led to my last position and this position. So honestly, I probably wouldn't change anything career. It wasn't planned, but again, when I think about how things align, there's no way I would be where I am and as satisfied as I am in my career if anything else was different.
I don't think I would change anything, but what I would tweak is my mind during the different stages. Because I think in the early stages, I was so focused on getting to the next step that I missed some of the things in that particular part of the journey. So if I could go back and enjoy those different parts of the journey a lot more.
So thank you guys so much.
Right. Okay, thank you, Asha-Dee, for the great talk. And let's give it up for both of our speakers one more time. Yes. All right, that concludes session 2. And next up, we have a networking session and eventually dinner and the concluding remarks in the Chancellor Ballroom. So thank you guys so much.